So you have, our elder sister who was blind at the time, and then you have the second one dropping out of school right after the junior high school. So I was the third person, or the third born, and having to grow in those circumstances. So obviously it was a very big challenge, and I recall that because of the various difficulties, the first time I actually began school was when I was 8 years old, and that was the first time I was going to be in the nursery school. I remember very well at Mofrachepe Preparatory, where a lot of those kids were, screaming and laughing and like day nursery papa, day nursery papa, and stuff like that. But fast forward, it's just been a very beautiful experience. I love my past because I drive a lot of strength, from all those difficult moments. I recall that after the junior high, after the nursery, when I went to the Accra Newtown 8 and 6 primary, and it used to be called 8 and 6 primary because it was in shifts. I don't know whether that was a typical example of a double track system that we are talking about, but I haven't followed the argument so much. But we used to go from morning from 6 to 12, and others would come from 12:30 to I think 4:30, those days. And anytime we're in the morning shift, right after school, we're back, on the field, selling at Malata Market.
Were you still with your parents at the time?
Yes, at the time I was with my parents, and selling to just keep body and soul together. And we used to do a lot of things. I sold this cooked corn, odemla. Those days we used to.
Is the one with the leaves?
Yes, odemla, the fresh corn.
I think we call it in Chechre also.
In Chechre?
Yeah.
Well, I haven't, made that, but in Accra here we used to call it odemla.
Okay.
And then sometimes we would roast, plantain, and then we'll go sell. Back in Malata, we used to do a lot of things like, there was a popular job we used to call akpena, and akpena was, sewing a sack basically. So if you have agbelima or this cassava dough, you
help in weaving the sack.
Yeah, weaving the sack for the market women, and after that you would carry it to escort them as a head porter. So these were things that and those days our.
For how long did you do this?
These took several years. I dare say probably maybe. I started before I began nursery school when we're very little.
You started nursery at 10?
At 8.
At 8, okay.
Yeah, so somewhere from, I think right from 6, 7, 8 were in the market selling. And I did that until after junior high school, because I remember that at the junior high school, life became more difficult because we had lost where we used to live in Newtown, and we were now living in Taifa, Burkina, and all 9 of us were living in one small single room.
You were 9?
9, yes.
I see. What's your position?
I was 3. Okay. I was a third. So, siblings were 6, and my parents, and then we had one adopted
child,
sister, like she was a cousin, but she was an orphan, so she was living with us.
So in totality,
we were 9 and living in one small single room at Taifa, Burkina at the time without light. So when we were in the junior high school, in order for me to prepare adequately for the BEC and all that, I had to leave and come and stay at Newtown. And the only place I could stay was at the market. So I didn't have any place to live, and in the market you used to pay money before you find a place to sleep. And in the night, sometimes when it rains, it will beat you up and all that. And we still wear our wet uniform to class, and just to be able to be in school.
You were sleeping in the market?
Oh yeah, sleeping. But sometimes we slept, in the market they have sheds, small sheds, some wooden sheds on which they sell. Sometimes when they close, we sleep on those sheds,
Why did they have to get to that level? Is it that you didn't have other relatives who could take you in and support?
Well, generally, when life in Accra, everybody is struggling. Everybody has their own stress and struggles level. So I wouldn't necessarily blame relatives, that much, because everybody. It wasn't like we had like great people with so much and who felt they were not going to help. Everybody was having like one struggle or the other. So I just had to leave. And those days there was a brother of mine who I used to call Peter. Peter and I were all in St. Paul's Catholic Church at the time. So he and I were living in the market. Okay. Initially, they had a room near the market, and they also lost the place. So Peter and then the parents and myself, we all have to resort to the market and just struggle it out. So it was a matter of survival. So just survive.
And it reminds me very well of one of your favorite quotes, that the depth of your struggles determines the height of your success.
Absolutely.
But let's talk about your dreams and, of course, ambitions at the time. I mean, talking me through all the adversities that you went through. What was your vision, I mean, as a young boy?
Well, as a young boy, I realized from where we were living that there was a better alternative to life, because Newtown was a very rowdy place at the time. In fact, it was a time that almost on a weekly basis we have the military police coming on an operation over there, and we have all this kind of stray bullets going, forth and back, because at the time, I mean, it was a hub of drug peddling and drug abuse and a lot of, weed smoking. And there were many times myself, I was sent to go buy some weed or buy stuff like that for people. And occasionally, but there was one experience where, during a raid, one person was hiding behind me and was like, don't move, so that if you move and,
something happens.
Something happens, you would bear the consequence. And whilst going through this, I still could see that, there were others who were living better lives around. We're living in a compound house. So that was my first point of, and in that compound, there were so many. And yet, every night, there were times that we struggled to find food. But you could smell the scent of very good jollof rice around, Sometimes you could smell chicken, And I was like, wow, it looks like...
You were salivating.
Yeah, you said, look, life can be better. Once others can get this nice stuff, it's possible that you can make it. And those days at St. Paul's Catholic Church, we were all going to church. And one of the things I observed, and I think church opened my eyes, because at church, you have all caliber of people coming. People driving big cars, small cars. People coming with their families, and you see them well-dressed. During church picnics, we're very little. We're observing. Maybe those days people will not know, but we'll be running around, looking at how people are serving and sitting down in families and, eating and sharing. And, and I always believed that there was a better part of life than what I had. And I was determined to, find that. And I quickly realized that the only way I could find that was going to be through education. Because whilst in school, I realized that, the acceptance in school was so high. Because, I was doing well, and I was very enterprising. The class prefect here, there. So I realized that the teachers were accepting me. They were, supporting me. So I realized that, you can make it when you focus here.
Right.
So these were some of the things that just shaped me, my ambitions and my aspirations as I was growing up.
Right. But at what point, and just in case you just tuned in, this is Inside Out. We are talking to renowned human rights lawyer Francis Xavier Sosu, who is be sharing, his life story with us. So at what point did you come to the realization that you wanted to be a lawyer?
I think I was living in these circumstances. I never thought I was ever going to be a lawyer, except that I developed a passion against injustice.
Okay.
Growing up, I seriously abhorred, cheating. In that environment, it was like the big-bodied people who survived most, and they were always determining the pace of things. And there were a lot of unlawful fights. You see women being abused, children being abused, and sometimes, look, I just remember the story where we were living, and if those who live in that same house will bear me out, there was a man called Mr. Ben, and I know Mr. Ben, we are good friends now, but this is a story I must share for everybody to know the kind of things that we saw while we're living in Newtown. There was a brother of ours, called Tete, and, perhaps Tete also maybe watching because now he's around working at University of Ghana. But those days, there were times that Mr. Ben, in fact, if it were this time, maybe he would be in prison, without apologies. Because there were times that Mr. Ben would use wire gauze to whip Tete until blood would be oozing, and then he would tie him up, put these blocks, molded blocks, and lock the door so nobody can have access. And it was so cruel at the time. So I always have this.
Whether there was something you could do about it.
Exactly. So I was growing up thinking that, look, I should be somewhere where I can
fight for
things like this. So it was just a natural thing that was coming until somewhere when I finished the university and I was doing my national service at the Village of Hope. Then I realized that there was something I should do, because whilst in the university, occasionally I'll go to the law faculty just to, just building interest around. But I didn't, I hadn't decided really that I wanted to be a lawyer until I was at the Village of Hope when, the decision was stronger. And then I met Don Barnett, who was willing to support me in law school. So then I said, well, this is it. I need to go and do law so I can do something about these things. And I remember that even throughout Legon days and throughout St. John's Grammar days, whilst I was in the senior high school, there were many times I was standing to fight for many people, because when I was at St. John's Grammar, I was the SP at the time.
Wow.
And I was the SRC secretary at the time. Then eventually I was a Greater Accra Zone 5 SRC president. And in all these things, as a young child growing up, I was just seeking to just be a voice to the voiceless.
But Francis, looking at the background you've given us about your upbringing, family, and all of that, how were you able to survive through your education?
The survival mechanism was in two folds. There were people who were willing to help, from point to point. And then there were many times I just had to endure the humiliation of being sacked for school fees and being lashed. Sometimes when we were in St. John's Grammar School, sometimes 6 hot lashes when we started. And then they would throw us out of the class. And I would always go and come back. In fact, in St. John's... Especially
being the SP, and you had to go through that embarrassment.
I had to go through all this before becoming an SP.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. The unique part of the SP was when... in the very early days, we hadn't gotten a place at St. John's Grammar, and I was still, at the time, still living at, Kotobabi in a small wooden kiosk. And during the vacation, we would still be selling on the streets, to be able to just, make your way out. But then, prior to that, was when, I remember Mr. Adekoka. I don't know whether did I say Adekoka?
Yes.
No, it's Mr. Coker, not Adekoka. It's Mr. Coker, who usually will come around with a long cane, and he will give us 6 hot lashes. One of those days we were in St. John's, and I was before my class teaching. Our economics teacher had not come. Of blessed memory, Mr. Tahiru. It's a very exciting thing, when it comes to Tahiru at St. John's Grammar School. Because he says that I was an Ofrijato, and that if you are an Ofri, you are either a witch, or he said you are either a wizard, something. He mentioned some 3 things that I mean
you couldn't identify with. Anyway,
and Mr. Coker had come to the class,
right?
And was lashing people and throwing them out of the class for school fees. Now, the lashes were so hot that I had no choice than to beg my colleagues that, please, when they mention Sosu, say I'm absent. And I was right in front of the class because I was teaching. And to my amazement, and my class, when they mentioned my name, everybody said absent. 3 times, said, "You mean Sosu is not in this class?" They said absent. And the man packed his things and left the classroom. In fact, I was shivering because I didn't know what to do. Eventually, I had to go back and apologize. I was in the class when you mentioned, but by that time, it was post ex fact. I mean, it was after the fact. So he said, "Oh, no problem. You can just go." So it was a real challenge, even with fees. But the Lord took us through. Let me say it like that.
So when you were at the Village of Hope, where you contemplated of becoming a lawyer, did you envisage at the time that you wanted to do human rights law?
No, at the time, no. I just wanted to do law. And for all of us who went to law school and for the law school interview, if my colleagues who are watching will bear us, or when we went to, and we go to Mokala the first time, the lecturers who often will ask, like, Nene Amegache, now his lordship, Nene Amegache, he would ask, what do you want to do with your law? Everybody said, oh, I want to be a voice to the voiceless. We want to fight injustice. Yes. It's a common phrase that we all have. But the extent to which we want to go with that, nobody knew. We all just knew that you want to do law so you can help your society, help people who are suffering some form of injustice, and just be a voice to them, But I never dreamt of the extent to which that would go. And I didn't know that I will perhaps today be called a renowned human rights lawyer, quote and unquote. I just was doing my
Would
work.
you say charting that course or that path has been fulfilling?
Yes, it has been fulfilling because there is no better satisfaction than seeing a client who walks out of court, who, with a victory from court. It's so exciting. I can picture Felix Nyaba, for example, when, a court and a crime...
And that was the first time I heard of you.
Somebody who is reporting crime from the juvenile court. So I used to meet him there, because I used to do a lot of juvenile matters. And then now he is the one who is in trouble. I was called to be part of, his whole team, and we went through the trial, and it was so obvious to me that he would be acquitted and discharged, but then he's convicted and sentenced. So you can imagine the disappointment, on his face that morning. The wife just broke into tears, and many times the wife would come to my office and would be crying and crying. And we kept fighting. And on that day when Justice Batu of blessed memory said, this young man shouldn't have spent even a day in prison with this evidence, he is therefore acquitted and discharged. Felix was not in court, so we have to send the news to him at Insawam. And that day, Manasseh Azuri was with us. And you can imagine the kind of joy in his face walking out of the door.
It was almost tangible, I guess.
It was so audible. You can see it. And you see, for me, that is the kind of satisfaction you derive from fighting for people like this. And I remember Erika Santi, when, we're fighting for Erika Santi at the Supreme Court going and coming. We're not too sure what would happen, and so on and so forth. And eventually somebody who was sentenced to prison for 15 years, he served all the terms of the 15 years, and yet now the Supreme Court says you are acquitted and discharged. Okay. Just look at the joy. And just think about this Charles Entry. Somebody with a mental problem. And because the issue had to do with the presidency, and anything with the presidency, with big banner headline, attempted assassination of the president. So everybody is just in shivers. And you see Charles Entry, everybody talking about it for like a week, and yet nobody doing anything about it. I had many people tagging me, do something. I have to call and just, brief myself and say, look, is this something you really want to do? What are the consequences? What are the political consequences and all that? I said, look, this is injustice. We need to do something about it. The man has been sentenced to 10 years. We appeal through the judicial review application, and the High Court eventually says that everything on Charles Entry has been quashed. You follow up to BNI, forth and back. It took almost like 2 years. Then Charles Entry is released. Just imagine the joy and excitement. For me, these are the things that give me strength to see people laugh out of their troubles, to see people rise out of their difficulties, to see people, have victory over the circumstances that would have otherwise destroyed their lives.
Nice.
And that is the kind of passion with which I do these things that I do as, a human rights person and an activist and a lawyer.
All right. So just in case you're just tuning, this is Inside Out. And of course, the show is GA Today. We are talking to lawyer Xavier Sosu. And I also know that you haven't had an entirely good relationship with all of your clients. I mean, recently, somewhere in the news for saying that you were charging them exorbitant fees, you were trying to shortchange them, and that led to the General Legal Counsel actually proposing to put a ban on you and all of that. I mean, when you look back and that moment of vindication, having to go to court, and I mean, the court saying that you are not guilty and all of that, how do you feel?
I mean, it feels exciting, but then again, it kind of reveals the reality of the battle that we are fighting. I always say that you cannot be a star without a scar. You cannot seek to fight injustice without you becoming either a victim.
Did it dampen your spirit in any way?
Not at all. Not at all. There are many who thought that should, that should be it. In fact, there are many people who don't really spend that much energy on clients like that. But just hearing my story say, look, I don't want to deal with any type of these people. It didn't, because I've always believed that it must be part. Look, I was writing a book titled Guilty Until Proven Innocent. And I started writing this book about some 5-6 years ago. And in this book, I was trying to explore the legal system, particularly the criminal system, jurisprudence that we have. And I was telling a very simple story in ordinary language about how our legal system is, and how people, when people are alleged to have committed offenses, they are actually deemed to be guilty before they prove themselves of their innocence, which is a direct opposite of what our constitution says, that when a person shall be presumed to be innocent until proven guilty. And I was basically using some of these stories that I had dealt with, but my own experience with the council is a crescendo of that, of that narration.
For the sake of time, some people have also criticized you for instance, saying that the Ghana Bar Association is a due collection agency. They are not fighting for, your cause. And a lot of the lawyers we have in this country are in chains. What exactly informed that comment? Well,
those comments are comments that I would stand by any day and any time, because when we talk about freedom of expression, I believe that that expression, the reason why we have the right to freedom of expression is so that we can speak against ills in our society without apologies. How is it possible? Now we are going to the bar conference, and I'm challenging all our people who are going to the bar conference. I know that people are putting themselves up to become leaders at the bar. If you say you are the president of the bar in Ghana, what are your core functions? President of the bar.
In what respect do you reckon the association has failed? For the sake of time.
Okay, fine. You see, for the sake of time, I believe that the association has not properly represented the interests of lawyers in Ghana, particularly young lawyers. I believe that the association over the years has only instead of being a very active mouthpiece, active source of advocacy for legal reforms, for protection of lawyers, for regulating, contributing to regulate proper regulation of legal education and all that. The association has failed in all those areas. When you look at the recent issues that we've raised about discipline of lawyers, the association, what has been the association's position? I think GBA can tell us what is GBA's position on discipline of lawyers,
right.
and all the issues that came with the General Legal Council. I think the association has failed in those respects, and there is no apologies to that. Right. And I think as we go to the Ghana Bar Conference, we should elect leaders whose reason for ascending the position of leadership is service to the people.
Right. Are you contesting again in 2020?
Absolutely, by God's grace. I will be contesting Madina. Right. So Madina can look out for me. I will definitely be coming for the Madina seat.
I see. Are you in support of Mohammed's comeback?
I believe Mahama will come back, and I believe 2020 he'll become president of Ghana.
All right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Francis Xavier Sosu is a renowned human rights lawyer, and of course, he has been my guest on today's edition of Inside Out. Don't forget that this segment comes your way every Wednesday of the week. That'll be it for the segment. My name is Ridwan Karim Dini-Osman. The show continues.